Well, good afternoon. Welcome. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, but I really look around the room and I think I know everybody in the room, which is awesome. And just met the one person that I wasn't sure about. So nice to meet our new hospital administrator, by the way, too. And I'm going to struggle. Your name again?
Janelle Kiker.
Janelle Kiker. So if you want to stand up, it's a great opportunity.
Socialize a lot, so I'm already meeting. I don't know where Corey went. We met Parker in the grocery store. I met some elementary teacher in the Family Dollar. So don't be surprised if you live here in Beloit and you're out and about. I will strike up a conversation with anyone who's out anywhere. So forgive me for that in advance.
You'll fit in just great.
Okay,
So,
good. So it's great to be here. I look forward to meeting all of you.
give her a round of applause. Yeah, so anyway, want to welcome you to NCK Tech. We're excited to have, of course, the announcement of the affiliation and what we're doing together with Fort Hays State University and Northwest Tech. So I'm going to have my colleagues introduce themselves. I want to kind of let you know the format. We're going to do some introductions, and then after that, we're going to talk about the why. We're going to talk about the structure of, and then we're going to talk about the process and where it's at and how it's going to flow through. And then following that, and we'll pick up for each other. Hopefully, if I leave something out, they're going to help fill in the gaps and vice versa. And then we will open it up for questions after that. So if you have some questions, if we don't answer them as we kind of tell you about it, that we would welcome hearing from any and all of you. So anyway, thanks for being here. And I'm going to let Dr. Mason start first. So Tisa Mason, President of Fort Hays State.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here today. I am Tisa Mason from Fort Hays State University. I've been there as president for 5 years. Before that, I was gone for 3 years at a small school up in North Dakota. Prior to that, I was the vice president of student affairs at Fort Hays State for like about 7 years. So really love the opportunity to come back and work with my colleagues. A little bit about me. I grew up in actually Western Massachusetts in a small town. My dad was a barber and my mom drove the school bus, and my grandfather had a firefighting equipment small business. She helped work with the books, because every time I have introduced myself and called my mom a bus driver, she goes, "Why am I always the bus driver?" Because I was the bookkeeper too. But just to say, I had the opportunity to go to college and it changed my life. I often tell our students at recruitment events that when I was in high school, being first generation, I didn't know a lot about going to college. And so I went down to the high school guidance counselor, and they told me that I wasn't smart enough and that my family couldn't afford it. But fortunately, I had the opportunity to go to college and get a degree. And it is why I look for colleges like Fort Hays and that are really committed to affordability and student success and how you put all that together. And that is also why that I'm very excited about this affiliation, which I'll come back and talk to about, because it's really driven on student success and community success and business success. And I'll be back with that. So.
Thank you.
I'm Ben Shears, and I was going to mention too, you're in really good company when it comes to hanging out with Eric, because I've known Eric for a number of years, and I don't think when you're walking around anywhere with him that he's unafraid to stop and talk to whoever, whatever, wherever. So you're in good company there. Ben Shears, so the president of Northwest Tech, been in Goodland, and we always say the top side of Kansas, the highest elevation in the state of Kansas. So the top side of Kansas, been out there for about 7 years. Prior to that, worked at Cali County Community College for about 14 years. I'm a product of Kansas Technical Education, similar to Dr. Mason. First generation college students. My mom was a bank teller. My dad worked on the street department for the city of Emporia for a number of years. My background, I grew up in the small town of Olby, Kansas. I know I asked this when we were down at Hays, but does anybody know where Olby is? Got a few head nods.
It's in the Flint Hills.
Yes, right on the edge of Flint Hills. Best known for his chicken, Olby Chicken House. On a side note, first job I ever had was washing dishes at the Olby Chicken House, best chicken in Kansas. So I had the chance when I was a junior and senior in high school, there was a new opportunity at that point to do a half-day program with Flint Hills Tech. And so I took advantage of that. I really wanted to go into automotive, was the area that I really had a passion for. Tools were too expensive. And so I chose the program that had the least expensive tools. My grandpa hooked me up. He let me scavenge out of his garage to get all the tools that I needed for the program. And so I went into heating, air conditioning, electricity, boiler controls, all of those kinds of things. So residential and commercial electricity. So I really like to do that. The benefit for me has been over the years, every house that we've moved into and remodeled, I've been able to rewire. So, it's always a good thing. So it saves a little bit of money. But I love Tech Ed. I love the idea of this affiliation. I think it brings something really, really powerful to Northwest and North Central Kansas. And I think has some really incredible potential. So excited to be here. Excited to see students here. So thank you. Hope you got some extra credit for coming. But I appreciate, again, just the opportunity to be here and be on campus today. Thank you.
We don't do extra credit like that here at our just giving you a hard time. So, all right. Well, I'm going to let Tisa start with the why.
Yeah, and I'm really comfortable with TISA as opposed to Dr. President. So let's be informal. I will say it for Hayes that we're all colleagues, so let's work together. So Ben and Eric approached me about this opportunity, and I'm really excited because we have some big challenges to address in Western Kansas in particular, and that is the rural populations and trying to get our students to get certificates and degrees and start businesses and work in rural communities, or we're going to lose them. And we're really concerned about that. We also believe that this affiliation will give us the opportunity to incrementally really change the delivery of higher education, being much more inclusive and fluent and hopefully fluid, and then hopefully get a lot of barriers away. So for students, we're really wanting to increase the opportunities they have. We'd like the students to be able to navigate as needed all three institutions and all four locations. Some people assume that doesn't mean that some of the Fort Hays students might not want to pick up a technical degree, but I think that is wrong. I think a lot of times there are opportunities for our students to get degrees and then build for it. But to do that, we want to make sure that that our systems are talking together eventually and incrementally, so that you don't have to, regardless of which campus you're going to, you don't have to pay another admission fee, fill out a FAFSA form, and that our academic advisors are very knowledgeable so they can help students understand what the opportunities are among the three institutions. But at the end of the day, we've all promised one another that we will do this collectively together, and that our decisions will not hurt any of our campuses, but that we can kind of, rise the tide that lifts all boats. But at the end of the day, our metrics aren't what's your enrollment, what's our enrollment. Our metrics are our students succeeding at a higher rate. Are our communities starting to thrive? Are we building businesses within all of those individual communities? So our focuses are on students, businesses, and communities. Because if our enrollments grow and everybody goes to the eastern part of the state, the big cities, we're still gonna have a rural population issue, and we've not really succeeded with our vision. So that's, I guess, the big why. Anything you'd like to add?
I think just, as we talked, I know with some of the faculty and staff at the announcement, but really having a one-stop shop. If you think about engaging with anybody, whether that's a student, or prospective student, or whether it's a business, the fact that you could get anything from a certificate or license like a CNA or CDL, all the way up to a potential doctorate degree, master's degree, and really anything in between. I think that that's huge for us as we go and talk to any of those, because it may be that, as we talk to a business, they have needs for technical students, but they also need some employees with a 4-year background as well. Now, collectively or together, we can manage those needs and make sure we're meeting what they need. So I think that's something worth pointing out.
I think the real benefit is really trying to begin to really think about how do we meet students where they are, right? Our three institutions operate very differently. And as we had the conversations down on the Hayes campus for NCK Tech last week, I'll make sure I differentiate that if I were to look at a carpentry student at Northwest Tech, right now they'll spend 2 years in that program. Very hands-on, doing a wide variety of things, building houses, same kinds of things that we do in a lot of capacities within tech ed. But one of the areas that our campus, we have not put a lot of emphasis in is from the business development side of things. So we're teaching the wire supplier skills and they come out very proficient. But one of the things we're looking at is how and where can we then plug in some additional business opportunities so that our students have a little bit stronger skill set when it comes to bookkeeping and managing a business. How do you manage employees that are going to be now reporting to you? How do you, as the business owner, move from the person who started up this business, who's been the one swinging the hammer, moving into more of that operational role? And those are resources that I think that the university really has a lot of potential to be able to bring to the table. Pick a program, countless opportunities. One of the examples that we've talked about, not in any of these settings, but what's the situation if you have a student, maybe that's an art student that's at the university, that's really curious about working with metal art. What possibilities does that open up for the student then to be able to take a welding class, be able to do creative work within the metal space? Flip that to the other side of things, and what happens if you have welding students who now all of a sudden are like, I really like the creative work that I'm seeing with, some of the folks out in the industry that are doing fabrication work that just look really cool. How can I then couple what I'm doing on the welding side with maybe continuing some education within the art area? So I think, again, we're kind of looking at how do you meet students where they are? Because the reality is, singularly alone, we can only do so much, but I think it really opens up some incredible potential for us long term. Begin to think outside the box, think outside of the little sphere of influence that each of us has, begin to think about this more regionally. So you want to phase into the next step?
Perfect segue.
So the other piece I want to talk about a little bit is framework. And so this is kind of the what. And the way I want to kind of think about this and the analogy that I continue to use, I keep looking for a better one, but I can't find a better one. I thought about using like a car restoration. Any auto students by chance or auto body students? Okay, we'll stick with carpentry. And that's looking at the concept of building a house, right? The work that we've been doing over the time that the three of us has been meeting is really trying to set a vision for this and really setting up what are some basic fundamentals and framework that we need to be able to build in which to build upon. So the work we've been doing is supporting the foundation, putting up the walls, putting the trusses on. Everything else from this point in time forward is really going to involve and going to require that we have a lot of stakeholder input, right? And probably the biggest benefit or the reason why we need that is because, and Eric says these kinds of things all the time, Lord help us if you're going to leave it to the three of us to do the entire thing. Right? I'm not a financial aid expert. We need financial aid experts in the conversation when we're talking about financial aid consortiums. What do you have? Well, how do you operate that process when you have students moving between two systems, two institutions under one umbrella? More importantly, how do you remove those existing barriers that are there now? Right? How do we begin to move students seamlessly within the system with as few barriers as possible? Because what we know about students, anybody think that student resiliency is becoming a greater concern in higher education? Absolutely it is. What do we see when students encounter more and more roadblocks? Are they more or less likely to graduate? Less likely, right? And so I think as institutions, we're very comfortable in the formality of higher education that higher education has been since the dawn of time. And we really have to begin reworking that framework and rethinking about how we can build the structure a little bit differently. And that's what we're really looking to do. And so the initiatives, I'll kind of back up a second. One thing to kind of highlight that we always like to be able to share and communicate is this process, this affiliation has had, fortunately, blessedly, unanimous support amongst all three boards. The Northwest Tech Board, NCK Board, and then the Kansas Board of Regents. And it is now off to the legislature. And we get that question sometimes, how are legislators responding to this? Very well. We're getting really good feedback. We've been out talking in the halls and talking to legislators to drum up support for this. And you know what, the most exciting thing for us to see is that legislators are excited to see institutions working together. What a novel concept, right? To see rural institutions working together to try to solve a rural problem. We talk about this all the time too, is that, we'd rather be in a situation where we're in the driver's seat on this thing than in the trunk. There's my car analogy. And so, we want to be sitting in a situation where we have three institutions that are coming at this thing from a position of strength. None of us have to be here at the table today doing this. None of us have to. We can continue to do what we've always been doing, but we will continue to get the same results we've been seeing. And so I think that's an important piece, to kind of think about, is that we're all here at the table in a position of strength, looking at this from a position of opportunity. I do always love to share, this is an affiliation, not a merger. We want to keep hammering that home. Merger involves blending funding streams, blending all your processes, blending your reporting structure, the whole 9 yards. What this allows us to do, that's kind of exciting, is to be able to have the separate federal ID, have the separate accreditation, and begin to work again under that broader 48 state umbrella for how we remove some of those hurdles. Some of the benefits that I think we'll see out of this that are really exciting to me. Our institution has done a lot of work in the last, since about 2017, really a deep dive into federal grants, and we've been largely successful. I would say we out-punch our weight class on federal grant writing. And what the neat thing with this is we can only do so much, right? As a single institution, some of those federal grants we pursue have $1 million ceilings. That's the cap. That's the most we can go after. But in a consortium grant on a federal grant program, those go up multifold. And so most of the time, what you see a $1 million ceiling. Usually you see about a $5 million ceiling if you go into a consortium. So you start talking those big dollars, and the ability, for instance, the three of our institutions to go together on a big federal grant proposal, or a $10 or $20 million grant proposal that drives regional economic development, not just local community economic development, which is where we're focused right now. But if you can begin to build a regional conversation in some of these things, you can move the needle a lot with those kind of funds. And so there's some exciting things in there, and we're just scratching the surface, right? So the big three initiatives, as we look at those from an academic standpoint, with, am I getting out of my lane now? I can't remember if you're on those or not. I'll stop and tell you my God.
He hasn't even told a story.
I haven't yet. But the big three things with ag, construction, and healthcare, those three big areas are critical for this region of the state, right? For all of Western Kansas, for that matter. And I think it was really important when we began those conversations. This is the framework kind of conversation that we're talking about, when we're saying, what things do we need to pick off to start? Because we're going to take this thing a piece at a time. We can't stand up the house all at once or it will fall. We have to take this at measured steps, and we have to pull in a lot of people to do it. So faculty, staff, students involved in that, community members, board members, we need a lot of voices at the table for this thing to take shape. And so that's what I think I'm most excited about, because I really like collaborative work. I really like to think about things differently. And so I think it's got just some really incredible potential for us as we really dig in with these three initiatives to start. And then there's a lot of other behind the scenes things. And probably the challenge for us right now is there's already conversations amongst colleagues at different institutions. My grant writer already reached out to the university and said, what kind of software are you using for grant management? Well, we're not even to that point yet. But I love that she's taking the initiative and she's curious about it, and she's establishing that connection, because at some point in time, that collective grant writing process will come to pass, and that relationship will have already been established. So the biggest thing, probably the biggest challenge we have in the short term, is once this thing goes, it's going to be a matter of trying to steer it, right? It's going to be our responsibility to make sure that we're staying on course, but then supporting to make sure these initiatives get up off the ground. Yeah, you bet. So a good case in point for, again, why we want to do these things. We had a call. This was the day before the affiliation, or the day after the affiliation was announced. I got a call from our local community development director. We do economic development, chamber, and visitors convention all within one entity. And so I sit on that board. And so one of my other little things that I really enjoy doing is the economic development side. And so Julissa is her name, our director. She called me, she said, Ben, I've got a company that I think would be really good for you to visit with. Can you get on the call with me when they call? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So she stopped by the office. We got on the phone call, and the company said, we're wanting to be someplace close to Denver. We were going to set up shop in Colorado. We don't like the regulatory or the political environment in Colorado, so we want to come to Kansas, but we want to be close to Denver. Well, you don't get any closer to Denver than Sherman County. So we're right on the edge in the state of Kansas. And I said, well, let's talk. And so we opened up the conversation, and I think collectively the three of us spent about an hour and a half on the phone. And one of the things he said, and I asked him, how many employees are you looking to set up? And he said, well, within the next 9 to 12 months, if we get this off the ground, And if you're the final community that we select, we're gonna need about 100 employees. 100 employees in a community the size of Goodland, we're very similar in size and scope to the community of Beloit, is a big deal. 100 employee employer is a big deal. And so, so what kind of employees are you gonna be looking for? What's the skill set? What kind of background do you need? And the reason I would say this, that I like to be involved in those conversations on the front side, is I think higher education historically has been very reactive to economic development, not engaged enough on the front end for attracting business and industry to the area, which I hope we can also work to address. And, he said, well, I need about 40% or so that are going to be in kind of the engineering space. They don't need to be engineers, but they need to be in the engineering space. Well, that's kind of vague. That's kind of general. But I said, well, we have a mechanical engineer program that we just stood up that supplements our drafting and engineering program that we have. I said, so we can help address on some of those kinds of things. And I said, but let me do you one better. I said, in addition to that, to meet those needs of that program, plus the additional 60% in different fields that you're going to need to be able to bring in, we just announced this affiliation yesterday. So I said, I can tell you that we can get you access into Northwest Tech to be able to recruit students that are graduating from programs to work for you. But now I can say that, and I did, I said, now we have the ability to open up doors within NCK Tech and within Fort Hays State University to also help build those roles. Now, the ideal situation for all of us is that if we can do something to keep them in the region, that's the most significant piece, right? That's how we begin to really drive change. If we can support our local business and industry, not just with lip service, but with also helping to create and enhance economic development opportunities so that we become attractive places for businesses to set up shop. I think that's significant. I think there's a really good reason to say my neighboring states have a positive net migration, and we see, and I'll get to the positive point on this here in just a second. The reason I think that there's a positive to stand on is that's because our kids are the kind of kids that employers outside of our state also want, right? I think it's safe to say, because I've seen it, and probably most of you have seen it, rural kids have a strong work ethic. So how do we keep rural kids in our communities growing and supporting our local businesses?
Very good. Anything to expound on that?
I'll give you two other examples, and one is when I met with our nursing department, the dean talked about being an early adopter. She said that the federal government had just closed a grant for nursing of up to $80 million. And so I know that will come around, but again, that collective as an example. Also, a couple of months ago, I was visiting with one of our donors, and in the last legislative session, they gave tax credit ability for donations to the tech colleges and not to the universities. And he wanted to make a donation to Fort Hays State University, but wasn't going to do it without the tax credits. So with affiliation, we can go back and try and leverage a gift for both universities, both technical programs. So it's just another example where we all have access to work collectively and continue to rise the tide that floats all boats.
No, and I will move into the process and where we're at there, and then we'll open up for questions. That way we're hitting on the things that you all are interested in. But as far as the process, and I'll start a little bit further back, I think that's what I did in Hays at NCK Tech, is we actually started working with a consultant. Gosh, I don't remember when, last spring. We were starting to have conversations, and we were kind of looking at this and going, where do you start? And it's, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, but where do you take the first bite is sometimes the hardest thing to determine. And so we knew that there was an interest by all three of us to go further, but we weren't sure how to do this. And so we had been reading some books collectively and listening to podcasts. And there was a podcast that had a gentleman by the name of John McIntosh. And so we thought, well, let's just give him a call and see. And little did we thought we would get an answer machine or probably have to send an email. Somehow we got a hold of his cell phone number, and he picked up a Jiffy Lube. I think it's just a great story to tell, but we're so glad that he picked up the phone. And he basically said, yeah, I'm not your guy, but I know your people, the people that were, we actually vetted some ladies and gentlemen that we ended up going with the consultant Jim Page from Maine. But our requirements were that they had been through this process before, knew higher education, but even more importantly, knew rural. And we needed to make sure that they were comfortable and familiar with the differences between urban and rural. And so Jim is certainly that. I mean, TISA always says, it doesn't get any more rural than Maine. And I've been to Maine and it is pretty rural. And anyway, he was which system did he head up before that? Was Vermont?
University. He's doing consulting work with Vermont
also.
on their consolidation.
And I one of the things that I think Jim brings a wealth of knowledge, but he also has talked about, this is the first time that he's ever done two things: worked with 3 institutions at the same time, and also worked with 3 institutions that didn't have to be at the table. I think that was said earlier, but that were there voluntarily. He said normally at least one of them is in dire straits and they're doing this out of desperation. And so he was very complimentary and commending us for that and excited to work with us through that process. So we met Jim, we moved through and started really this last fall working through this framework that we put together and starting to work on the legislation. And we're really meeting almost at least once a week there towards the end as we were getting things ready to launch the legislation and to announce it to folks. And so that was, again, building the framework that Ben talked about earlier of the House. And so we went from that to each board. And so we announced it January 11th, January 12th, the Northwest Tech Board unanimously approved it. NCK Tech Board did on the 16th of January. And then the 18th of January, it was passed by the Kansas Board of Regents, all unanimously. They're all excited about this. And so the next step in the process was to get it to the revisor's office. It requires legislative action. And so we had a bill that we had ready to go, went through the revisor's office with very few changes. It's now House Bill 2290. And we testify on the 21st of this month. And so we're excited about that. That's where it's at in the process. It's in the House Higher Education Budget Committee right now. So once it comes out of that committee and gets voted, hopefully it comes out of that committee and gets voted on the floor, then it would go to the Senate and go through a committee there, and then also come out on the Senate floor, signed into law by the governor. Then we have it in law. Okay. And that sounds like, wow, then that's finalized. But actually from there, it also has to be approved by or authorized by the Higher Learning Commission. All 3 of our institutions are accredited by the Higher Learning Commission, HLC. And then it also comes back to our individual boards. So Ben's board, our board, and the Kansas Board of Regents will all get a chance to make sure that as it went through this process, okay, that because legislation often changes. It starts out and then a lot of people get their hands on it and do things to make it different than what it started out being. And so so that will be the process. And then once all 3 boards ratify, then at that point it will be finalized and we'll be able to implement it. Our target for implementation is the fall of 2024. So that's when we're hoping that it should. Well, we hope it'll pass in one session. I like to warn everybody when Wichita State, if you're familiar with what Wichita State and Wichita State Tech did, this is similar, except that theirs is in an urban setting and ours is in a rural. So there'll be some different challenges there, but and different opportunities as well. But it's very similar. Theirs took 2 sessions, but the second time it went through, I think it was unanimously. I mean, it went through really easily the second time, and ours is similar to that. So we're hoping that the legislature will go, oh, yeah, we've seen this before, and it'll go through. But we'll see. I'm sure there'll be some opposition and things that we'll have to work through. Once that's all ratified and done, then we'll, like I said, launch in the fall of 2024. And what am I leaving? Oh, and as far as when that process starts, March 6th is the first day that we will have a steering committee that's going to meet. So while that's all going through authorization and approval through the legislature, there will also be things like this, opportunities for input. You see the website up. If you go to that website, there's a place there where you all can put in your own suggestions, your thoughts, whatever you want. You can direct it to one or all 3 of us. And we'll be looking for those opportunities. I also will tell you that students, if you want us to come to student government, to student senate, be happy to visit with you there, or individually, you want to come by the office and talk about anything that you're excited about, worried about, want to know more about. We're excited to do that. Same with faculty and staff. So the whole thing is we'll come out with a better product, and this will work better for everyone involved, the more voices that we're able to hear. And so that was one of the reasons, and one of the differences between WSU Tech and what we're doing is that we have that final ratification process. And so during that time, we're building what's called an affiliation agreement, and there'll be details within that cover a lot of things that we may not be able to answer today, but hopefully with input from all of you as we work towards the end of this process, we'll be able to hammer those things out and make it work. So anyway, that's the process. Tell me what I left on.
Well, I just want to clarify that when we get to implementation with a target of fall of 2024, those are just a couple of things. Again, incremental. We have randomly just started saying it's a 50-year process. And actually, hopefully it's an ongoing process. So we may start with this major and the pilot that we do, prove some best practices that will inform the next major. But then over here, as they continue to implement, hopefully they continue to learn and experiment and do even new and more exciting things. So they should constantly be on a path of evolution and new ideas and new best practices and learning from one another. But hopefully some of the early areas will then inform the folks that go into the pilot process down the road.
And as President Shears talked about earlier, this being a home, I mean, as we're getting that input, that's applying the sheathing, applying the shingles and the siding and all of that. But then as we talk about the evolution, that's remodeling the house. That's, you know, it's not going to be what you want forever. And so as it evolves and we learn each other better and we learn about opportunities that we can provide for students, that we can provide for our employees, whatever that might be for our communities, that's when we'll morph it into, and it will evolve into something different than we even imagine it is today. And so that's the beauty of how we're trying to craft this, is that it will be something that will be very flexible and be able to change as the needs change. Anything else? No? Good. All right, so I think Chandra has a microphone, and you may or may not need a microphone, but and we need somebody to ask questions. I always want to give the first opportunity to students. So really who we want to do this more for than anyone. But if you guys are not anxious to ask questions, which looking at their facial expressions, that would really be the case.
Avoiding eye contact.
Yes. And I was gonna, you know, Emily has a chance of fitting in with the students over here, but Corey, you and Bob, I'm sorry, guys. You probably should have been on the other side. So, but no, just kidding. But anyway, you guys have any questions for us? You're the 4 students that I see here. There may be others.
Kudos for being here.
Yes. No questions right this second? Okay, well, it's not speak now or forever hold your peace. So if you come up with one later, and we can probably throw a few out there that were asked in Hayes by some students too. You know, one that I'll just throw out there now, just so people kind of understand and help understand the divisions. The question was, well, is the tuition rate going to be the same for all of us? And the answer to that is no. The answer is that we're all still 3 separate entities. And so our tuition will remain separate from the universities and separate from Northwest Tech. And of course, as things evolve and we look at services and things that we can involve, there may be some things that we start to look at, but right now that's not the case. So on your tuition, I hate to say it'll stay the same because it's likely to go up just because of all the inflation that's going on around us. But it won't be because of this affiliation.
We had a donor just the other day who wants to set up a new scholarship that would apply to Fort Hayes, NCK Tech, and East Air Academy. And the attorney for the foundation said they needed to wait for the affiliation. But we've already had somebody step up immediately and talk about that.
What's the high points of the legislation you're asking the legislature to consider? Dollars probably won't be a big piece of that.
No, we wish. No, it's a zero fiscal note on it right now, so probably faces less resistance that way.
Right.
And they've not ever incentivized any of these. I think the state would like to see more arrangements like this, so I won't be surprised if at some point there isn't an incentive attached to it, but not with this. Probably the high points, and of course I'll let my colleagues fill in where I miss, but I would say, Doug, where I would expect is the governance. Okay, so it will change governance where the board, and this is part of the affiliation agreement, so we don't know exactly what duties and roles they will maintain and what will go on, but ultimately we will be part of the Fort Hays state. So the ultimate governance will go through the president's office and through the Board of Regents. So that's one of the changes. And then also, I was trying to think the other big change. That's one of the reasons why it has to go through HLC is because of a change of governance. And so legislatively, honestly, we've tried to leave as much out of the legislation as possible so that it can't morph over time. Because if we put it in the legislation, then it has to go back to the legislation to be changed, and that process is arduous. And so we would much rather have it something that they don't really need to care or know necessarily on some of those things. And so the three of us can collectively, and I say that with our boards or whatever, you know, it may not just be the three of us, it may be our boards still, because our boards will still serve a role in this. And so as we work through it, it evolves, but we want to leave as much out of the legislation as possible. And there's a lot to that legislation for just that.
There is. I know one of the things that is a significant driver, when you look at the current existing statutes across our current legislative bodies, you see NCK Tech and Northwest Tech listed in several other spots dealing with specifically two-year college things, funding, residency, all that kind of stuff, amongst others. And so part of that process and why it's important to go some of those high level pieces with the legislation is that you also have to update all of those different statutes that are connected to the two-year colleges and specific technical colleges to be able to reflect the change in governance, but also the change in name. And so the change in the name piece is significant because everywhere that you see, like in our case, Northwest Kansas Technical College in there, it's going to need to be changed within the legislative process to reflect Fort Hays State University - Northwest Kansas Technical College and - North Central Kansas Technical College. We joked last meeting that's not going to be the marketing name, right? Because we couldn't ever get it on a small shirt. You need 2 extra large or 2 XL shirts for all of that. But those are pieces, aspects that do have to be updated as part of that legislative process as well. And a lot of those things are still yet to come. You know, again, this kind of gets back to that putting paint on the walls. We need marketing people, we need admissions people, we need people that have that kind of a skill set and brilliance to be able to work with us, to be able to stand up kind of that, the branding, the name recognition, those kinds of pieces for what that takes shape. Just like if you look at Wichita State and WSU Tech, everybody knows WSU Tech is WSU Tech, but they're really the Wichita State University Campus of Applied Science and Technology and something. Yeah. It's longer than ours. So, but it's WSU Tech for marketing. And so those changes will come about as well.
Hopefully, one of the themes that you keep hearing is the importance of all of us looking for that expertise that I can't tell you how to develop a nursing initiative. No way, I can't. What I want you to know is that same philosophy applies for the presidents of these institutions. I am not taking over the vision and the leadership of NCK Tech and Northwest Tech. Your presidents will remain your presidents, and just like the vice president of academic affairs at Fort Hays State communicates and keeps me up to date and talks a little bit about her initiatives and shared goals, she drives that work with her team. It'll be the same for my colleagues, and I'll consider my colleagues always Eric and Ben, because they know their communities, they know their faculty and their staff, they have excellent experience, they're really great at their jobs. And so my job is just to keep that communication going and everybody on the same page. So it should be, in my opinion, at least where we sit right now, pretty invisible that that Eric and Ben are reporting to me. It's just communication. But I wanted to make sure that you heard that from me as well.
One of the neat things, I'll just tag on to that, of the two models in the system right now, when you're looking at a university and a technical college, you've got the Washburn model and you've got the Wichita model. And one of the challenges we heard clearly when we're, by the way, I love that you're wearing red and black. Those are Northwest Tech colors on the side now with an NCK Tech shirt. So thank you for that. That's fine. We'll take that for today. But one of the neat things, I distracted myself. I'm trying to think where I was even headed.
We weren't listening. So,
No, I'm just kidding. All right. Oh yeah, with kind of that communication process. When we look at the Washburn model, the individual who serves our colleague, our counterpart at Washburn Tech is a dean at Washburn Tech. And so in order for him to have direct access back and forth with the president to move initiatives, and by the way, that's within a fully merged system, just for the tech to be able to move initiatives on their campus, they have to go through many, many, many layers to be able to get things done. And that was significant because one of the beauties of being a small rural technical college is how nimble we are, right? We can have an idea on a Friday, go to a board meeting Monday, and by Wednesday, begin to work on standing some things up, right? I think that nimbleness is critical. And so as we talked about that structure, that's one of the pieces we really liked about the Wichita model was that the campus president reports to the university president. So you can keep that line of communication open, free flowing. And also when you have the president of the university and you need an initiative that's going to involve the university, she can help break down roadblocks, barriers, any of those kinds of things or systemic kinds of things that might be in the way for making that happen. So it's kind of a cool structure. Really like it.
Other questions? Please have one more.
Any advice?
What types of support do you need from businesses and organizations and during the legislative process?
Yeah, the more we can let, and Susan and Elaine are both supportive of this. And we've got a lot of, we've talked to a lot of legislators already, but just anytime you're in Topeka, certainly lending any support to that would be helpful. I think just really in helping community members, I'll be honest, in my situation right now, when I put my hands down, it doesn't talk as loud as when they go up. Oh, wow. Keep my hands on the top. Bless you all. This is a preacher's microphone. I don't know how but anyway, I think it's really important. I haven't heard a lot. And again, in my situation right now, I'm not here as much as I may be and not engaged with the community, unfortunately, as much as I often am. But I would just say I haven't heard a lot from the community. You want to assume no news is good news. But if there's somebody that is struggling with this and the concept, I certainly at least point in my direction. I mean, I'd at least like to have that opportunity to have the conversation with them. I may not be able to convince them this is a positive thing, but at least they can hear why we're doing it, what it's about, and make sure that they can base their opinion off of facts and not off of hearsay and things that might be happening downtown. And so, especially those of you that were here, if you feel like you've got a great grasp and you want to start telling people about it, great. If you're feeling like, well, I know enough to be dangerous, and then send it my way. And I know a little bit more and can still be dangerous, but you know, that will help too. So I think that's this kind of support. And then I know there was a department with banking. I don't remember if it's the College of Business or whatever.
Yeah, W. Robbins Banking Institute.
Yeah, that already is anxious to get started with this. Again, we've heard from, we had 3 pilot areas, but we've heard a lot from other people that are like, we want to move on this now. And I've always said I'd rather use the reins than the spurs. So we like people that are excited and take an initiative with that. Well, the banking department has been or will be going around the community of Beloit. And I assume they'll be doing it in Goodland and other places as well. But talking to banks and finding out, you know, what are their needs that the university might be able to help with, or that we can help with, or collectively we both can help with. And that's just one example. I mean, we want to serve the medical industry. We want to serve all of our industries. Again, it's really important. Our communities And students really are the focus of this. And we know, and I've said this at all the meetings, so I need to say it at this meeting too. And this may sound a little bit idealistic or Pollyanna, but you know, Friday nights are great times to have rivalries on the basketball courts, on the football field, and all that. Those are healthy. It's fun for our communities to have this, but the rest of the week, we should be working together because a strong neighboring community makes our community stronger. And so, excuse me, if we are not able to turn that rivalry off and we're all looking at each other as competitors instead of as locking arms and saying we're going to fight the greater forces, I mean, the demographic shift that's going on and so many things that are happening in our area, that if we don't find ways to work together, then we're not, you can be the last person standing. It just means you're going to die last. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to be healthy. And so we really feel like maybe we can set an example of what that can look like from an educational standpoint, and hopefully other people will follow suit, and maybe we won't have the big rivalries the rest of the week. Friday nights will be fun, but the rest of the week we can all work together.
We are collecting letters. So Mark Hess from Hess Industry just wrote a letter. There's a lot of information on our website. We're posting letters there. We've got support from the Kansas State Chamber of Commerce. So if businesses want to, you know, do a letter of support, that would be great. And so we have a brand new cybersecurity institute. We've had the banking institute. Our service area for Fort Hays State is like the half of the state, you know, all west. And so one of the things that I said to our folks, particularly with the banking institute and cybersecurity, is that I know that you serve the whole state, but right now I want you knocking on doors in Goodland and Beloit and getting into Rotary presentations and Kiwanis, whatever, you know, if there's an economic development. So if you all are members of these groups, our faculty and staff said, we'll go. So I know our banking institute asked Eric, give me the name of the folks, but if you're in a civic group or an employment group and you want presentations, we'll hit the road and come and talk a little bit about what those specific entities can do. Right now, the Cybersecurity Institute has got a goal of 15 micro internships where our students can help with cybersecurity information, from insurance to compliance to all kinds of things. And as we're starting our first year, it's free to businesses, because we know that large businesses have their own staff, but small businesses they get a problem, we're gonna lose them. And so while a lot of metrics are about adding businesses and counting all of that, ours is about preserving businesses. So again, we really want to see a splash, particularly in Beloit and Goodland. And anything that you can do to make that happen, just contact me and I'll get the people there.
And as you hear her talk about that, I hope that you can start to see how beneficial this could be to so many communities that, you know, when you bring a problem to me, sometimes my answer has been, sorry, Doug, we don't do that. You know, that's just not in our wheelhouse. But now I can say, you know, we don't do that, but I don't know if my colleagues don't do that. And so let me check and we can get back to you, and so it just puts a lot more resources for all of our communities at our fingertips and allows us to solve some of these problems together.
I think the Banking Institute was in our shop today, so.
Good.
Great.
I
That's good to hear.
I gave them your names.
Yeah, but I was in you guys will appreciate this. I was in a meeting for a software conversion.
Are you the manager of that?
No, thankfully I'm not. The manager of that.
Tricia knows a little bit about that.
Yeah.
As does Brandy. Other questions? She escaped, but I was really hoping Danae, I wanted you to meet Danae.
She said she had a meeting.
Okay, yeah, no, she was here, but Danae is the story that I always tell about too, because even and currently, I mean, Danae was one of those, I told this story at Fort Hays the other day, but just really helps highlight, you know, what this can look like for students. Danae came to us, and I remember meeting her mom and her at a welding, I think it was a competition, but at some event. And her mom was very nervous for her for two reasons. She was a female going into a male dominated field, and she wasn't sure that she was ready for college. And so, and I was a little concerned for it too, because those of you that know our welding program, it's pretty tough. It's very intense. And so, but she went in, she was successful. And after she finished that, she wanted to go to our second year program, which is actually on Fort Hays's campus. It actually is Fort Hays classes. So I love telling legislators about this because those classes were already occurring. They already had all the equipment. They just needed more students in them to round it out. And our students were interested in taking those. So taking those classes, they reverse transferred that back to us. And we issued the associate's degree. So 1 year was taught by NCK Tech, 1 year by Fort Hays. Most of the gen eds from us, but honestly, doesn't matter. You can get them either place. And then goes together and ended up in an associate's degree. Well, from there, she said, you know, I kind of think I can do this college thing. And so she decided to go ahead and get her bachelor's degree in construction management. And I remember when I walked into the Center for Applied Technology on Fort Hays's campus and I saw her, and I had never seen her in anything but a welding garb with a flip up helmet. And all of a sudden she's like in a dress and she cleans up very well. And it's like, wow, this is awesome. And she had opportunities all over the state. We were very fortunate that we had her to come here and teach welding for us, but we're so pleased to have Danae. And I always like to add one other thing. She's from Nebraska. So we stole one out of Nebraska that's now here. And so I think when you hear too often, and you know, TISA's aware of this, 4 years aware of this, that you know sometimes students get started on a 4-year path and they realize, ooh, I jumped off in the deep end. You know, I'm not ready for this. And so when you hear Danae's story, she was even worried, no offense, it just was worried about going into the shallow end, right? She was a little nervous about her. Her mom was, at least. I don't know if Danae was, but anyway, clearly she showed that she can do this. She mastered it, worked her way through. And so I think there's just so many ways to reach success. And I think that's what we're trying to help expose students to too, that you can start 2-year and go to 4-year. You could start at 4-year. And if it didn't work out, you could get to 2-year and rebound off of that. There's just a lot of ways that we can help students reach the finish line, which is our goal. And so I'm excited for that.
I finally got a spot for a story.
He was just waiting.
I was waiting. You did a good job. When I was growing up, I lived on a farm out by Opie, Kansas.
This isn't rabbit.
It is.
Oh, man.
And so my dad and I would go out, you know, during the winter time and we go shoot rabbits, right? We go rabbit hunting. And, you know, we get done with a day of that. We come back and we have the rabbits ready to clean and all that kind of good stuff. But my mom never asked us when we got back to the house, how many bullets did you fire? It was how many rabbits did you bring home, right? And I think higher education has been for a long time focused a lot on how many bullets did you fire? How many did you get in the front door? Not on how many you're getting across the finish line. And ultimately, getting back to that whole piece about meeting students where they're at, this really seeks to address some of that, right? And again, creating those pathways for the university students that may want to pursue technical education, or as was described, maybe need to pursue technical education so they can get a degree, get plugged into a job, and be a contributing member of society. And at the same time, providing those opportunities for our technical students that have a desire to go on. To be able to pursue that, because my case in point, you know, I was that student as a sophomore, very similar conversations with my high school counselor. He told me I wasn't college material. It told me that I needed to, his words, go to the VOTEC, because it was a VOTEC at that time. He said, work hard and pray you can get a job. That was the extent of my sophomore counseling session. You know, but it was probably what I needed to hear. I think I was rocking about a 1.9 GPA in high school about that point. And so kind of lit a fire under me a little bit. I did it, and it was the best decision I ever made. And so again, you know, our job is to try to be that conduit for students who, again, I figured out once I was at the technical college that A, I was at a college, and B, maybe I could continue on. Maybe this college thing was something I could look at. And has led me obviously on the path that it's led me now. So looking for those opportunities, bringing rabbits home, and thanks for letting me work the story in. But
I knew you would. I am a little nervous because we're going to Goodland for a town hall meeting next week, and he's invited us to lunch. And I hope rabbit is not on the menu. Any other questions or comments?
You know, I actually know Danae because with the inauguration video and then in some of our other publications, she was always on the front doing this. like ultimate confidence. And I loved her. And so that's what I know exactly what you're talking about.
She's all over our stuff too, so. I mean, she's pretty much- yeah, you know, like a lot of these athletes get their name and image stuff.
Yeah.
It's a good thing that was before, Danae didn't qualify for that, so we probably owe her some money. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question for you. I was gonna ask you. You want the microphone? No, it's okay. It's okay. Because it's kind of a negative thing, but one thing that I've heard, because when you're in economic development, everybody thinks that they want to talk to you about everything. So one thing I've heard that someone was telling me about a conversation they had with a group of people, and the consensus was that this was a negative thing because it was just a stepping stone for Fort Hays to take over NCK Tech and then just close down this campus, which I'm sure you've probably heard that before. When people say stuff like that, how would you explain, like, is that sort of part of it's just an affiliation and not a merger, or how would you respond to that if someone said that?
I'm happy to respond, but maybe do you want to, or do you want me to first? I'm happy to take that one. So
I don't think
first
that's
of all,
true. That's just what
no, and I appreciate, I mean, these are the kinds of conversations we have to have. The elephants need to come out and we need to address, and we talked a lot about elephants in this meeting too, so. But anyway, the elephant in the room. And so what I would tell you is this: first of all, again, coming to the table in a position of strength was important for us, because if we waited until, you know, we weren't very desirable as a partner, then at that point, that would be a very likely scenario. As part of this, one of the first things that we did when working with Jim is to lay out some kind of boundaries, I guess, or some guiding principles and things that we promised that we would not do. And one of those is to close campuses. So it actually will be part of the affiliating agreement. I know that will be in there. We haven't agreed to a lot of it. There's a lot of work yet to be done, is what I really mean by that. But that piece will be in there. And so this campus is safe. And honestly, I hope that people know, you know, I grew up in this area. I take it very serious, and I know how important this is to our community. And so if I thought that was the path that we were going down, I wouldn't be interested at all.
Yeah.
So, and I know Ben feels the same about the campus in Goodland. And so it's very important, and honestly, and this is maybe where Tisa could speak to too, but I think there's an excitement from the university about being able to provide some of the programming out in our space too, to be able to branch out. So
Yeah, it should be multi-directional. And I think also Ben pointed out, I thought great at the last session at the NCK Tech East campus, that there's a lot of things that these two partners can do that might not even involve the university as well. But we have actually a documented statement that will not happen. The other thing is that our service area is a lot better, it's bigger. So excuse me for that. And you know, I know you have an outstanding admissions person, because I adore Trisha and I know that she works hard. She can't cover, I am assuming, the same area that we can with the size of our staff. Tech ed is the fastest growing educational aspect of higher education right now. So hopefully by that fall of 2024, one thing I want us to be able to hit is that our admissions programs materials all have all of your tech ed programs, so that when we're out in different areas, we have capacity to bring you more students immediately into those areas. And I think there's just a lot that we can do. If it's only serving one partner, then we failed in our or one community or no communities. But this is all about strengthening one another, and we have a strong commitment to that.
the North Star, as we've defined it, is to better and enhance our opportunities for our students and our communities. And so closing campuses would be counter to that. And so that'd be another thing that I would point to also. It's just not part of why we're engaging in this.
No, and I think our informatics department, for example, is very excited. Several people are like, can we start now? Can we? And they're starting to make outreach, and it's very exciting. But and they were talking about, I just really want to talk to our partners to figure out what they have, because maybe we can help with some of our faculty cross teaching and upscaling and sharing faculty and expertise in a lot of different ways. I think that the opportunities are really practically limitless once everybody gets together. But if all of our nursing faculty and our ag faculty, construction management faculty know how to promote all and build cross referenced courses and programs and materials, I mean, it should feed us all. That's the goal, is it feeds us all in our communities and our businesses.
I think one of the things that often drives those conversations is fear, right? That's the underlying tempo that's driving that. And I always love Eric's analogy comparison when he talks about the Friday nights and the analogy he was using earlier about setting those kinds of things aside. Because the reality for us is this, there is no massive population rushing to Northwest and North Central Kansas right now. It's just not happening. But we have really solid, good economic development people working in these communities and working very hard. So where does this partnership look to undergird that, to strengthen that, to be able to bolster that up? And the thing I think to consider is that if we want to see what we've always seen, which is declining rural populations, rural businesses struggling, how many of you know of a business that runs the risk as soon as grandma or grandpa closes shop, there's nobody to come in behind them? We've all got, right? We've all got businesses that are in jeopardy in that regard. But if we want to see what we are currently seeing, then we just need to keep doing what we've been doing. Change is difficult. Change is hard. Some people don't like change. I love change, but that's just my general kind of how I'm wired. But I see this certainly as one of those opportunities that, and I've said this repeatedly before it passed locally as well. This is not a magic, or this is not a silver bullet that's going to solve everything, but it certainly is a step in the right direction. And I think it does begin to have that conversation and change the conversation over taking a more regional approach to things versus just everybody sitting in their silo, pedaling away, hoping that they can get the thing turned around.
Thank you for having the courage to ask what might have felt like a difficult question.
Students, did you guys come up with anything? Nope. Concerned about anything? Nope. Excited about anything? Not even like the Chiefs winning or something like that?
We didn't cancel class today.
I know, did you?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, no,
A lot
definitely.
of cookies over there, I see.
Yeah, so we'll hang around a little bit. If you want to visit with us individually or whatever. I do want to thank Kelsey Strode in the kitchen for providing the cookies. I know they're going to be delicious. I haven't had one yet, but I know they will be, because everything they do is delicious. That's why my waistline looks like it does. I also want to thank Robert and Michael in the back for helping get the microphones and everything set up. And Shane, thank you for getting the room set up and everything. Appreciate it. So otherwise, thank you all for being here, and we're excited to answer your questions. So have a great night.